Okay, so I think I'm going to start.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a very rich and full conversation, so we need every minute uh, to be able to exchange. So for those of you who do not know me, I'm Atalante Moquette, the founder of Giving Women, and a part of the work that we do is to create these panel discussions to really bring forward some of the issues that are being faced by not-for-profits or thematics around girls' and women's issues. So I myself have sat on many boards and sit on many boards, and it's always been a really interesting experience, a very enriching experience, and I believe also very rich learning experience. However, over the years that we've also worked on the other side of that experience, where we're working with organizations that are growing and are trying to build a good board and trying to find a good relationship with their board, we see also the many difficulties and barriers and struggles that come with creating the perfect relationship, the well-designed board, the roles that we play. And one of the things that I often would ask myself, am I really bringing something to the board that I'm on? Am I contributing? What is my role? And I think having had this discussion around us, we realize that we're all struggling in this world of philanthropy to understand what is the role of and how can we become a really effective board which will help to bring forward the mission of the organizations within which we are working. So that's just like my own personal perspective on it. We have a great panel, and I'm so grateful for you for giving us some of your very, very precious time. I realize everybody is super busy. And what's great about this panel is that we will be getting aspects from all sides of the story, which I think is always good. So without more ado, and I will introduce the panelists as I ask them the question. My first question goes to Michelle Joannis. Thank you for joining us, Michelle. Michelle is the director of the Chouv Foundation, the teaching hospital in Lausanne. And she became the director, and becoming the director, she also had the role of re-energizing and renewing her board. So it's, I think, a very interesting perspective for us to hear. And the question that we're going to start with, and we're going to ask all of our panelists is, what do you think the function of a board is? Can you give us some example of the kinds of decisions boards should be making, and how can these decisions be made? So I'm going to start with Michelle, but also to give us a little bit of background on how you recreated that board of the Chouv Foundation. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And greetings to everyone from all over the world. So nice to be here. I joined the foundation 5.5 years ago. We're a university hospital, and I'm responsible for finding funds for research, training, and patient care. That's really our core business, trying to find funds to support everything from cancer research to construction projects, you name it. In my role, when I joined the foundation, it had become dormant for a good 5 years. The board was a little bit, I don't want to say dysfunctional, they just didn't meet very often, every 18 months for an hour over lunch. And the annual report of the foundation would consist of a one-pager. So I pulled out my textbooks, thought, how am I going to revive this foundation and energize this board so that we could meet our target? And so some of the key functions of my board was to recruit me. So they were in charge of figuring out what my job description would be, what are the key competencies that they needed. They were part of my panel when they recruited me. So that's one of the big roles. The other role is to oversee that we uphold the mission, the vision, and the values of the foundation. So they really set the strategic vision of where they want to take this foundation. But they're not in it alone. They decided to recruit me because I brought a certain skill set that they didn't necessarily have. So we really became a team where they bring competencies and skills that I don't have, and we mutually support one another. So they're responsible ultimately for the good governance of this organization. They're responsible for making important decisions, no, not small decisions, but important decisions. They're responsible also for making sure that I run this foundation well, in a legal, ethical, and responsible manner. They're also, for me, that external outlook. They bring that external perspective, and they ensure that the plans that I present to them for their validation, so that's one big decision, are aligned with our core values and our vision. I'll talk a little bit about this later, but they really give this impulse to the foundation. So even though they delegate the operations of the foundation to me, they're ultimately responsible for what I do. I want to bring up two examples because I'll share more during our talk. So in terms of important decisions, I give this example. I have a donor who is passionate about what we're doing, wants to make a transformative donation to support research in a particular field. However, when I do my due diligence on the donor, I find out that he's being accused legally for some pretty big thing. Now, I feel comfortable declining the gift, but considering the size of the gift, I felt I shouldn't be bearing this decision on my own. So I consulted my president, I consulted the director of the hospital, and together we made the decision of declining the gift temporarily until things have been resolved legally. Another example, I have a donor who's very passionate about a particular disease, comes to us with this idea of wanting to make a transformative gift, but had an impact on the structure of the hospital. This was not part of the hospital's strategic plan. Is the hospital ready to take this on? Yes or no? So again, I mobilized not just my board, but also the board of the hospital in making a decision whether or not to accept this gift, which changes the landscape of our hospital. In the end, we said yes. Voila. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. And there's a lot in there in terms of the responsibilities, but also about how do you develop that relationship, which is clearly a relationship of trust on both sides. And I think that's something we'll get more deeply into. I'm going to come to Sarah Fields, who is a sort of serial entrepreneur. She has all sorts of hats, but we've invited Sarah to join us today because she sits on the board. So she's the board voice, although I know Etienne sits on many boards also, of her experience as being a board member. And again, the question goes to you, Sarah. Sarah is driving in the streets of Nairobi during a rally, a car rally, and trying to get through. So we are very, very grateful for Sarah's contribution. Sarah, I'd like to ask you also, what do you, as a new board member, see as the role that what you can bring to a board, and what do you see your role is?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me here. I'm delighted to be here. I do apologize if you suddenly hear the exhaust pipe of a supercharged turbo rally car go past. I am approximately 3 meters from the racetrack unintentionally, so it's a bit like being in a Formula One situation, and it's very random. So hopefully we'll be on the move soon, and then the sound will improve. Can everybody hear me now? Okay, great.
Yeah, perfect.
So I joined our small NGO charity. It's a UK-based charity. It's called Stand Dams Worldwide, and we implement large-scale water poverty solutions, mostly across 6 different East African countries. So it's a small UK team. I'm actually based in the US myself, and most of our implementing partners are on the ground in East Africa. I joined as a volunteer 5 years ago. I then, I suppose you work your way in a way, got more and more passionate about the solutions that we offer to water poverty, and joined as a trustee, and actually, slight quirk, was made a member at the same time. It's a quirk we've corrected. It was a sort of automatic process to become both. Then volunteered as the treasurer, and now I'm interim chair, whilst we work out some difficulties with our chairman who's ill at the moment. So I've had a sort of 5-year journey into the board. I think I've been very lucky, actually, because for a small charity, we've got a very active, very involved, very informed board, many of whom have been involved for almost 20 years. So between sort of 20 years is probably the longest serving, but I think it's been quite an easy transition. Sorry, we are actually on the move now. So I would say that I've slotted into a board that is well functioning, that's highly engaged with what we do. That's, sorry, here comes another one. That many of them have had experience in the field. So many of them, like myself, have been out to East Africa, met our implementing partners, and so have a real, genuine understanding of what we actually do on the ground. We have trustees who have marketing and communications expertise, trustees with sort of HR and legal expertise, trustees with fundraising expertise, and we are only a team of 7 trustees. So there's a lot of expertise on the team, and everybody brings that expertise to regular meetings. We meet every 3 months. We have subcommittees for a few of the more detailed functions, and we are, I would say, on the whole, well received by our operating team on the ground in the UK. I think sometimes we get a bit over enthusiastic, and perhaps create more demand than our capacity can sort of supply. I think that's sometimes a challenge, but on the whole, I think we're pretty effective. We're out recruiting for more trustees at the moment, so that's definitely one of our functions. I think a lot of our functions are in line with what Michelle talked about. So sort of strategy, vision, mission, making sure that we're true to our ideals, making sure that we manage any potential conflicts and any risks. We have a board risk register that we pay a lot of attention to. I think the fact that we're very small actually means that we're all very hands-on. So perhaps as an example of a way in which the board interacted, if you like, with our operational and with our staff and our team members in the UK. So 7 trustees, also 7 full-time members of staff in the UK. We recently produced an impact report. We hadn't done that for several years. The process of producing that impact report was very collaborative. So we had a little subcommittee for it. We probably met 2 or 3 times. We all reviewed it independently. We gave our input. The office turned it around, and we were able to launch, our new impact report with absolutely everybody's support, including going out to our 25 strong membership, who are the ones that sort of keep us true to what we're doing. So that's an example of something very practical that the board has recently taken part in and helped to form and help to shape. And so we're all together behind it, I guess, which has been really useful. I hope that gives you just a bit of an insight.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I pick up on things which I think are really close to my heart. Is you talk about passion, you talk about being informed about the work that's being done. So really understanding that work, that you have an alignment and understanding of the mission, which I think are really, really important parts. And I think it's really interesting, because I'm going to come to Etienne now, is that the 2 of you talked about this developing a vision, the strategy, working together with the operational management group, and really being a team in doing that. Now, as Etienne Etienne Berger, who I'm going to introduce now, who has 1,001 hats. So I will only focus on a few of them. He was a co-founder of WISE Philanthropy Advisors, one of the most important philanthropy advisory organizations in Europe. He also sits on several boards himself. He set up Swiss Philanthropy, and he is the co-founder of the Board Academy. And I think that what we've heard so far from the two speakers is really the kind of feeling that one has as a board member. What is it that our role really should bring in that relationship between the board and the management? Now, in some cases, the board is the management as well. So that's also sometimes difficult to deal with. But I'm going to come to Etienne now, because I think Etienne will fill in some of the things that I don't often talk about, the more technical stuff as well, which is an important part of responsibilities of a board. So for you, Etienne, as a co-founder of the Board Academy, what do you see as a function? What is it that you present at your academy as being the function of the board, and what is that responsibility?
Thank you, Atalante. You're being very kind of me with me, but I think as anything you do, it's the results of many people involved and only one of them within the organization you mentioned. I think that being said to your introductions, I think I'm going to be speaking more from the perspective of the grant-making foundation than the operating one, which I think complement well also in other interventions we're going to have. But I think this is a little bit of a twist, because I do think that while we talk about governing mechanism of foundations, the kind and the type of foundations you are can make a big difference in the way you are set up and organized. And I think this has to be taken into account. To come to your points, I think one thing I would praise you and your team to have set up that sessions is that we are in an age where governance structure of any institutional society goes through process of professionalizations and not standardizations, but raising the bar. For the one who live in Switzerland, heard the radio this morning, we heard talk about salaries in large humanitarian organizations. So there is a huge debate about what makes you legitimate as an institution. And the governance, the governing body of any institution is key. And non-for-profit, from my perspective, are going through a process, grant-making foundation, through a process of professionalization. Because in reality, a foundation's role and the board of a role is really to implement the vision of a founders, be it a man or woman or an entity. And I often say moving, from the statute and the vision to the impact. So how can you move and what might be the means? So that's the primary responsibility of a boards. Because in reality, foundations are resources dedicated to a goals, and the board is the primary entity to decide how that can be done. In that sense, depending on the size of the resource you have, you might choose to hire a team, or you choose to develop, as Michel presented before, professionalization, building a team. And in that sense, in that conversations of the size and the way to realize the mission, which is the primary goal of the boards and the primary function, is really to decide what is the right way to set it up. And in that sense, sometimes it's building a team, but sometimes the resources are too short and you mix up roles, as Michel was writing. So in functioning a role, I think the law are pretty clear, but in reality to our conversation, I think, and I like Michel's point, is as much as what you do than what you don't do. Because sometimes the boards, as it evolves, need to acknowledge that there are things they won't be doing anymore just because you're hiring good professionals. I give you one example on this. To me, the board has the responsibility to hire directors, but the director has the responsibility to build a team. So in that sense, there is a huge temptation when you're founders to have you and everyone in the team. I think it's not the role of the board. The board gives the trust and hire professionals, directors. And so in that sense, I think it's as important in good governance to know as time evolves and you move to the bylaw, to the impact, what are the different phases? And as you grow or decide to hire professionals, the board has to also step up. And that's the cultural shift you need to go through. And that's needed. And that's okay, because sometimes foundation might well be startup, moving through different phases, more resources, a bigger team of professionals. So I think that's one element I want to bring, is really to reflect that actually that can evolve over time. And it's as much what you decide to do or not to do. As much as for the boards, I think I want to highlight three main things. And I know I'm a bit technical, so I think it doesn't go without the passion leaders. I hope one can see that in my presentations. But I do think that there are three main goals which are key for a board. The one is certainly to lead. A board needs to make important decision on leading, and one of the decision leading is to decide to have a team or not to have a team. One element is to set up rules of governance. One of the elements is to make sure the surveillance, the check-in, the check and balance. It's a very important one because foundations has no shareholders, no clients, no one to report except the authority. So in that sense, it's a very important element that the boards need to set it up. So the first one is leading. And then the second one is the elements of strategy, the selections, in the case of the and the third one is really.
Sorry, we can't hear Etienne. I think we missed the last 2 points.
So one is leading.
Yes.
The second is the grant making, and the third one is managing the resource, which are primarily in general the financial asset. Those are the three main. I mean, if you regroup, I think the main task of a board. And at the end, to answer your question, which we geared towards going today, for me, the crucial points of a board is the ability to take decision as a group. And I think this is a central point of the conversations. Is compared to a different entity, the boards need to be able to take decisions as a group. So the quality you would be looking for board members, the dynamic and the culture you want to create, the role of a chairs is all geared toward the ability to have enough dissent in opinion of view, so that you get different perspective, but enough of a culture of conversation to build strong decisions that are either clear for the stakeholder, the grant meetings, or for the teams. That's what it's all about. So if I can make my intro on this. Many more, but we have a bit more time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great, Etienne, because I think that is an important part of what, as a board member, we need to recognize that we have that financial stewardship is so important. The accountability, how the structure happens of the governance. But what I really like about what you said is that there needs to be, and it really echoes also what Michel had said, an ability to look from the outside in with a variety of en prendre du recul, as they say in French, and give that. So I think that's really interesting. I'd now like to go to Carol Frampton de Charnay, who is last but not least. She works for Peace Nexus, a foundation, and she's in the organizational leads an organizational development service. So Carol brings a perspective of having worked with many organizations and helping them to build the structures around their relationships with the board. So it's on the side of the organization. I think that Carol will give us some perspective of sometimes the barriers that the actual team finds when they are relating to their boards. So Carol, I'm passing it on to you.
Great. Thank you very much. And yes, so we're a small Swiss foundation, and we sort of specialize in providing sort of organizational change, organizational development supports to mostly to civil society organization. And what I often see is that when we receive a request and we sort of approve a request from the organization, when we engage with the board, they sometimes can be extremely supportive of that, but not necessarily see that they're actually part of the system, and that as the organization needs to invest in itself to adapt to its growth, to a changing context, to sort of just review how it functions to be more effective, the board can sometimes see it as, oh, that's great for the organization, but not see that as the organization evolve, they need to evolve too. So building on Etienne's point, I think there's some basic legal requirements and minimum for board functions, but you need a board that is really fit for purpose. And so you need to have the ability to unpack their role on a regular basis and see how it may need to evolve as the organization and the context change. So I like to talk about mutual accountability. And obviously the board is there to hold the staff, the team accountable for delivering on a mission, but it also should ask itself regularly, how are we performing our own role, and who do we need to be for the organization to really continue to perform? And the needs will not be the same when you're in startup phase or later on. I like to use the analogy of the performance review. And if you think of it, you know, the sort of human resources process that everybody knows, and it used to be a very top-down interaction where the supervisor would pretty much sort of unilaterally rate the performance of the employee. When now it's shifted really to a conversation, and while the employee needs to report back on objectives and how those objectives have been met, the manager will usually also ask, what kind of support do you need to perform at your best, and how can we together co-create the best results for the organization? And that's really the kind of conversation that would be great to see take place more at the board level. I see very often sort of the understanding of the role of the board being different between the leadership and the board, and sort of speaking at cross purposes and not necessarily unpacking that. So one way to help with that conversation is to have terms of references and creating space once a year or as part of the strategy cycle to really unpack those roles and those expectations and see how they may need to shift a little bit. And really the board that requires accountability needs to also see the importance of modeling it as the governing body of the organization. Unfortunately, it's quite rare. It's starting to as Etienne said, we see that board are starting to professionalize and sort of integrate some of these concepts. My experience is that often, especially for not-for-profit, board members can be very quickly quite defensive because they've invested so much in the organization as volunteers. They may have invested a lot of their own identity in the role. And so it's quite difficult to have a conversation that, you know, acknowledges the importance of their function, but also says, well, let's look how that may evolve. And I found that it was difficult to sort of try to introduce a governance expert into the conversation, and that board members will are much more likely to listen to other board members who carry that same burden, who also wake up in the middle of the night worrying with the same issues. And you have to also admit, board members end up often being brought into very sensitive conversations and issues. So that needs to be honored, and other board members are the best ones to actually fully understand that and create a safe space for board members to then maybe reflect on their difficulties. So we created a board level peer learning group for our partners and alumni, and that has been there's been an extraordinary response to that, because that creates a safe space where they can take that step back and look at how they perform, how they're playing their role, how may that need to change, what are sort of the bigger also contextual trends they need to sort of bring into their own thinking, but they can also bring the immediate challenges and support each other as board members, acknowledging that, again, it's not an easy task. And what has been maybe the greatest compliment was one board member leaving his board meeting to join the peer learning group call, saying, I need to be here so I can be more effective as a board member. And it's that kind of sort of critical eye and reflective attitude that I think is very, very helpful for board members. But I'll leave it to that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. I think that also leads us very nicely into the next question, which I'm going to address to Michelle. When I actually was sitting on the board of the IBO, the International Baccalaureate Organization, which is a big organization, and I was the chair of the governance committee. God knows why, but I think it came with the vice presidency. One of the things that it totally resonates with me, is that I thought that as board members we should do every year is really ask ourselves, what have I brought to this board? What have I helped? How have I helped to move this organization on as a board member? And that kind of self-assessment, I think, is also important. But I think it's also those relationships with the management team. But as we move on, I think it will be interesting to get Michelle's, because she has created or recreated a new board. And you said something very interesting on our discussion about empty chairs and chairs. And I think I'll let you say it because I think you said it very well, is what has been what have been the challenges in actually identifying the right people to sit on your board?
So so we are a small shop. We may work for a very large hospital, but today we are 3 employees that run the hospital, the foundation, sorry. Some of the challenges that I faced initially was this knee-jerk reaction to recruiting people that we know. Not necessarily based on skills and competencies, but people we know, we feel comfortable. And it's a lot easier, and we'll be surrounded by people we'd love to see on a regular basis. So really, it was resisting recruiting people we know. The other aspect that I needed, since they recruited me as an expert in fundraising, I knew that I needed diversity, gender diversity on my board. If you read any literature on philanthropy, you know that women are the ones that often make the decisions in terms of giving or not giving. When I joined, I had 1 woman and 5 men on my board. So I wanted parity as a minimum, if not more women. And I was not going to renege on that aspect. And so I came up as a director with potential names of people and of women, and that worked. So stay true to what your needs are to execute the vision and the mission of your organization. The other aspect that I needed to refrain from, or encourage my board members to refrain from, was to recruit doctors and scientists that are frankly all around me and available and happy to work with me. As I mentioned, our foundation is not a grant making, but a fundraising foundation. And so I don't need doctors and scientists. They're the ones that need funding. And therefore, if I were to pick, say, for example, the head of surgery, well, everyone here in the hospital would think, well, they're just going to fund surgery. So perception is very important. So refraining also from recruiting people you know and people that are all around you. There's also sometimes this idea that we need an accountant, but I have plenty of them around me that can do my accounting. I need someone on the board that might understand numbers, but frankly, I'd rather have someone that is passionate about our mission and our vision than someone who's just going to be a technical expert and not really care much about what we do at the hospital. So gender balance, resisting recruiting those that we know, and refraining from recruiting people that are not necessarily needed on our board because they're around you. So those were my 3 points.
Great, thank you. Very interesting, because I think you talk about gender balance, and we're going to get into diversity on the board. And I think that Etienne and I also have some strong ideas about that. But you had that diversity was very related to a specific reason. I think that that's so important to understand what your function is and what you're supposed to do. But the passion keeps coming in. Everybody's talking about passion, and I think we mustn't forget that this is really so important for a board member. Etienne, you have set up the Academy for board members, and I think that we've all sat on boards where we haven't had proper training. Sometimes we've had some good onboarding, sometimes no onboarding at all, and we're struggling to find our way through it. And I've this experience. Do you believe that we should all be trained in terms of we should all go through a course to become a good board member?
No, certainly not. No, I don't preach for that. But I was recently on sessions of board of companies, and one of the chairmen said, I expect the people sitting on my board to spend 30 of their time to train, to be good board member in companies. So what I'm sometimes impressed is the way we lead, I mean, foundations, beside the passions we all have, are doing something very important. They need to deliver goods for societies. And as you said, they often is pro bono sitting on board. So I think it's not because you do that pro bono that you don't have to set the same expectations of what you bring. In that sense, I just want to bring one figures out of Switzerland to give you a perspective, because I think there's many ways you can learn. But in Switzerland, 91% of board members sit only on one foundations. That's roughly 56,000 people. So in reality, many people who sit on the board of a foundation have only one experience sitting on one board. And I think this is not the best way to learn, because I think very often you learn by sitting on other boards the way you do it at Atlantis. So I'm not claiming everyone needs to train. What I'm saying, the level of expectation is growing. You might be in an environment of a foundation that fosters, as Carol was saying, you know, self-assessment, but also learning peers, but you might not. And I think today you can't avoid to train as a board member, just to make sure you understand your commitment and your responsibility. And that's why we launched the Foundation of Board Academy, just because we think that actually if 56,000, 57 sit only on one board, and you know that's a lot of people for something which is quite important. So in that sense, you know, I do think that you need to train. And I want to say one more thing on that is while I appreciate the notion of passions, which are important to drive, I think in life, passion is not the best drivers of anticipations and decisions. So while you need that embedded in your, I think a good board members need four qualities, if I may add, that you can train or not train, maybe embedded in you. The first one, I think you need to have, as Michelle was saying, an interest, but not a conflict of interest in the foundation purpose. So you need an interest. If you're not interested, don't join because you know someone. Join because you have genuine interest. You like peace, you care about peace, you go to Peace Nexus, you care about it. That's the number one. The number two, I think you need to be driven by the value of the foundations beside the missions, because values drive decisions. So if you're not comfortable with the values of the foundation, you won't be able to take decisions. And that's important in conversation to see, are the value which you related with? And there are not other values, they might change over time, but that's the one when you join. The third one, I think, is competences, which is the one we all look for. But I think sometimes we look for very specific competences, fundraising, knowledge in peace, but they're also transversal, fiduciary duty you have. And that's where I think training is useful, because you don't know it all. It's not because you have a good bankers, a good whatever professional that you understand the dynamic of a foundation. And the last one, I think, is time. And I think it's not time for business as usual, but it's also time for crisis. And while you mentioned I sit on different boards, I've heard once a rule which I like a lot. I think you should never sit on more than 5 boards. And if you're chairman of one, it counts twice. Because in reality, you have to be very mindful that when you join a board, what you can provide is not only your skill or your networks, but it's also the times. And if the weather is bad, Michelle cannot do it without the board, which is present when there is a crisis. So is Caroline or myself or Sarah. So in reality, I think you should be very humble about boards, while you might have values, adequation, interest, if you don't have time, because I think that's what you bring and that's what you be conscious of. So, you know, I think just, and training don't help on time and values, training on all competences. So I think it's helpful, but it's only part of the answer.
Yeah, no, and I think your whole thing about values is really important, but I think often that a board may not even be aware of what their values are. That's even a job that needs to be done to develop those values together and see what they are. But I think you're so right about time, because, you know, there are only 2 board meetings a year. Well, if you're a really good board member, you make yourself available for the moments of crisis and moments of decision making that may not be within the board meeting. So I think time, you have to recognize that giving time is beyond the 2 meetings or 3 meetings a year. So all of those things are really useful. Sarah, could you tell us about your experience, what quality that you embody as a board member brings most value to your organization? And you have had it's interesting because you've had a long relationship with the organization before you joined the board.
Yes, absolutely. I think at the moment, as I sit here in a traffic jam in Nairobi, still wondering whether or not I'm going to make the next meeting that I'm having on behalf of the charity today, with with the big insurer foundation who we're hoping might become a donor. Flexibility is probably the big one. I have to be continuously quite flexible with my time and my energy. I've actually just spent 2 weeks both networking in Nairobi and also 10 days with one of our biggest foundation donor, and we took out 13 of the people from the island where they belong, and we've been building a sand dam with them, with our local implementation partners, and with the community that's going to benefit from the intervention. So definitely a lot of flexibility. I had to agree to do that relatively short notice. I've stepped in and sort of juggled around my role on this board for the last couple of years. I would say I benefited from really thorough handover and work shadowing almost. So working alongside some of our other trustees to kind of build up that understanding of how everything works in this charity. Sorry, there's another rally car going past. And I think understanding the realities, you know, again, I'd go back to, I understand passion isn't enough to sort of get you through, but if you're passionate enough to go out and get on the ground and look at the work that you're doing and really understand it from all angles and all perspectives and challenge it and ask the difficult questions, which I've been doing, you know, which I constantly do. And then I think that I can bring way more then to conversations at board level in our meetings on Zoom, you know. So I think, yeah, flexibility, being willing to get out there and really understand the realities on the ground is important. Another thing is getting diversity into the board. I think for me, I'm very keen to get a local, so we're a UK-based charity with local implementing partners and work all over East Africa. What we didn't have was an East African necessarily. We've got trustees who have Kenyan background, but we didn't really have someone who's recently been engaged in the sort of work that we do in the areas that we do it. And we've now luckily found a trustee who's actually done some fantastically relevant work to do with sand in Makueni County. And she's going to be a really fantastic local ear, if you like, to give us more context and to give me a greater understanding of the sort of environment in which you work. Just give me one moment. I'm going to have to drop off and wake my taxi driver up because they've just unblocked, seriously, and finished the rally. So
Okay,
I hope
we'll
that's an answer. Sorry.
We'll catch you on your way when you get back to the office. And
Thank
I'll
you.
move on to Carol. Thank you so much. That, yeah, I think that is interesting, the flexibility, but also the ability to really understand what the foundation work entails. Now, not, you know, some foundations and work is not about going to the field because they don't have the field to, you know, there's so many different ways of doing it. But I think that really understanding the work is important. Carol, in your work, and I know that for me also, there's sometimes a disconnect between the management and the board. And I recently joined a board, and it was so interesting to hear in the background the kind of the management almost in fear of the board, or, you know, what are they going to say? Are they going to stop us? And I think, so that trust and that team, I mean, Michelle talked about, we are a team, and you're a small group, so it's easier to be a team, Michelle, because it's not a big group. But how can we fix that? Have you seen that in the work that you do? I'm sure you have. And how can that, you know, how can we change that?
Yes, no, I mean, the trust is absolutely key. And I think what sort of Sarah is describing, to sort of have this kind of engagement of board members, that they, while without sort of necessarily jumping in and interfering, but that they really go on the ground, they see the work, they get to know also the team that is implementing the mission that they care about. You know, you're not going to be able to build that trust with just 2 board meetings, especially Zoom board meetings a year. You need to build that collaboration and show, honor each other's role and contribution. I wanted to also just react, if I may, to the other points that have been made. The idea that it's very difficult in all the interactions to not get too personal. I mean, Michelle, you were saying, okay, well, we just bring in the people we know in the board. One exercise I did with one board was just to really look at, first of all, the work of the board, of the organization. And this was an organization that was doing a lot of field work, but doing the field work so to prove the effectiveness of a methodology to sort of advocate for policy change. So there were these 2 aspects of the work, the field work and the advocacy. And then within the organization, you had in the culture a strong entrepreneurial, pioneering culture, and also obviously the need to be a good shepherd of resources. And just by laying out these 4 poles in a way, and to ask board members, which voice do you carry the most? And they realized they were they were all in one pole. And so without personalizing the issue, to sort of say, okay, we need board members to carry all voices. And so otherwise you're going to skew the organization into a direction at the expense of very important voice, such as being a good shepherd of resources or understanding the work on the ground. So there are ways to try to a little bit depersonalize and really again look at what is required, what does organization need. So that's an important point. The second point also is that it used to be again that the board was the only source of accountability. Now I think it's more useful if boards see themselves as part of a network of accountability, because there are external, for instance, principles that you can adhere to and be monitored against publicly, including in things like racial equity. If you could, as an organization, choose to report back on certain standards and shared measurements. And so that is a way for the organization to be accountable to a broader audience than just the board. So to have the board sort of map out what are the different things we need to be accountable for, what are the mechanisms in place, and where do we focus on as a board that really needs our attention. And the third point is also around diversity. And I think it's absolutely essential that the boards reflect the values and the commitment of the organization. And so, for instance, if you have an organization that is committed to, gender inclusion or youth inclusion and has a board that absolutely doesn't reflect that voice, then it's really a very serious credibility issue that you have. The governance needs to reflect the priorities and the values of the organization. But having said that, it can also be quite dangerous to when you say, oh, we work in 3 continents, so we need 1 board member from each continent, because then you have you have 1 board member that is supposed to represent Africa or is supposed to represent Asia. And that actually gives too much power to 1 voice, 1 perspective when operating in a very complex environment. And so again, you can be more creative and say, okay, well, I'm in favor of quite small boards because of the commitments, the time investment that is so useful. But then again, look at beyond that board. If we have to really go deep into a context and understand it, let's have advisors, let's have trusted resource people, so that there can be real debate and real discussion, rather than, oh, you've lived 5 years in Myanmar, so therefore you're going to end up making all of the decisions about the organization's work in Myanmar for years on end. And that can, I think, is also a very common trap that organizations find themselves in.
Yeah, and that leads us very nicely into the next question around inclusive and diverse boards. But I think that you made so many excellent points about accountability and about the accountability being not only within the board, but within the context of the whole organization, and then beyond. What are we wanting to be accountable for? What are our and again, that brings back the values. What do we stand for? Therefore, how do we ensure that we are really fulfilling our values and maybe getting that outside view? And I think this whole idea about having specialist advisors coming in to advise. You don't have to necessarily have all that special experience on the board. But I think for me, and the University of Geneva did a study on diverse and inclusive boards. And I remember, again, my experience as on the IB board, and we are an international organization, and they were talking about inclusive and diverse board. But, they had, people from different continents. We all had the same education. We weren't diverse. We were identical. We just looked a little bit different. So I think, what do we mean by having inclusive and diverse boards? And I'm going to Etienne, who I know has very strong opinions about it. And I kind of share them with him. And I think we never talk about also age. We have a lot of really old people on boards like me. And so we need to think about that as well. So I'm going to Etienne. In the meantime, Kathleen, are there any questions that we needed to have addressed or?
Yeah, so I think, I think some of it will be addressed with this, because there are people asking about sort of, whether, you have for-profit, people from the for-profit sector on boards, and also to what extent, I think Elizabeth was asking about even the inclusion of, local community stakeholders, how you involve the community and the groups, and not just donors, or and basically how to manage that inclusion. So I think that will be covered. And then there are some other questions that we can probably look at.
But I think some of those points were actually addressed by Sarah also talked about.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just to see, now that we're talking a bit more about inclusion, to think about those aspects as well.
Thanks, Kathleen. Okay, Etienne, you're on.
So we a gentle gesture when there is 38 people and 3 men to say Etienne has strong view on diversity. I don't think I have strong view on diversity. I think I have strong intuition that it's an element which is not enough discussed among the foundation. That's for sure. I think this is a topic which is not widely enough represented, and I think foundation will face a challenge of legitimacy where diversity within the teams and the board are part of the answer, because otherwise it's just, as Carol was saying, a credibility issue. Or can you address climate change with a board of men from the north over 65? It just doesn't work. You don't have the same perspective. But I think it's also to see the other element is not change half of the boards, it's going to work the answer. So I think, to me, diversity is a means to an end, because what you want to do again is have a foundation that operates at the professional standards that respond to the visions of the founders, whoever it is, adapted to the times which the foundation developed. It's not sticking to the promises initial, but really being entrepreneurial mindset. But to me, it's a means to an end. And I think on that conversation, different geographical setup inspire different representations or different stakeholders within foundation sports. And I think we need to acknowledge that actually for some, gender is a huge issue, for others the ages, for others it's your geographical locations and societal. So the criteria can be different. I think it's important, but with a thorough and thoughtful reflections. So that's as first as my intuitions. I want to stress 2 processes which I think might be meaningful experience. I'm also chairman of a foundations, as mentioned, Swiss Philanthropy Foundations, and we are going now through a process of years of reflection on diversity and consulting different stakeholders. And I think I often said we're not the smartest, but we hope we can learn the fastest. We don't know much about diversity except the decision we've made, but I hope that we can learn in that process with the consultant who is helping you to have something which is solid, both for the boards, for the team, and also the beneficiaries and the people with whom we work. So I'm very humble about that. I think it's all about learning and getting good advice to make good decisions. But I also have to say that while talking with many other foundations, sometimes I had the answer to say, why we need the diversity policy? We have a board with 3 women, so what's the point? So I think sometimes we see diversity as a means, or we reduce it to what it's not. So my one element is that initial reflections, foundation, grant making and foundation need to go through that process, and not only for the boards, but to look at the entire ecosystem. And Carol provided, I mean, to me, very insightful and inspiring reflections. So thank you for that. I think the inclusive and different mechanisms of governance or advisory are very important. The other element I want to grow is that within, which I do also, which raise training for board members, with Georg von Schnuber and the University of Basel and with Beate Kert in Zurich, we have developed that trainings to train professionals or board member to be gaining insight. But we've also decided that 25% of this group will be below 35, because in Switzerland, half of the foundation were created the last 20 years. And that's going to be a huge issue who's taking over, because the passions might be with the founders, but you might lose the passions of our generations. And I think and sometimes the board challenge the youth to have an expertise, and I think really reflect on what are their perspectives. So I think youth provide both an expertise and a perspective, and their perspective is important. But there's a cost to get in. So we decided with creating something which is called Board for Good, which everyone can see. It's boardforgood.org. It's in Swiss. It's.
You want to put it in the? Will you put it in the chat for us?
I can do that after that. It's a scheme that provides grants for people to apply to be part of the training, and we had over 60 grantees over the last 18 months out of the 150 plus people trained, because we think that the generational elements and age is one of the dimensions that will matter in Switzerland. I'm not saying gender is not, I'm not saying societal economic background is not, but I think this is one element where Switzerland as an art time is really to get over generations. And because it's pro bono and it's time, then you might sit on boards when you have time, and that's for 50. And so there is an issue of age. And the younger generation is desperate to access to structural power, to have influence. You can go in the street, you go to extensive rebellion, that works for some, but for others, they want to have access to where decisions are made, because that's where they see their personality having an influence on society. So I think Board for Good is very humble and small attempt, but I think this is an element. I want to bring, while I can't resist, to a third experience we made. We've also launched something which is called, with 3 other foundations, Swiss Philanthropy Foundations, called something Demain Pact. So it's the idea that 10 youth can make grant making over a years, being free about the topics and the team and the scheme they will choose. And those are youth supporting youth. And, you know, we're just in the process, we've launched it. I'm happy on another conversations to say more. It's going to be, testimonials is going to be shared in Swiss Foundation in September. But I think, to Carol's point, changing boards is not the only one to be innovative in governance. The question is, how do you include within your decision-making more diversity? Boards is part of the answer, but don't pressure too much the boards, because otherwise it's not going to move the needles. Reflect about the ecosystem, and the foundation is just a unique stakeholder in society that just really need our creativity. Yeah,
really, yes. That's great. That's great. That's a great initiative, Etienne. Thank you. I think that the whole diversity issue is one that you know, it's again the jargon, the talk people are talking. At Human Rights Watch, we were instructed that we needed to have a more diverse committee, and after some discussion about the group within the group, we said, well, what does that mean? And actually, the process we went through, which I thought was very interesting, was to face our own prejudices and to teach ourselves how we can be much more open in the way that we think about things. But I think the richness of diversity is to have an opportunity to have different viewpoints where you can then construct the best possible solutions. Michelle, I'm going to come to you, because I think, as having recreated this and regenerated this new board, we haven't talked at all about, you know, governance processes. How do we do recruitment policies? And in terms of how long should people sit on boards? Should it be a lifelong position? You know, what are the advantages, and those kind of things, those processes also inform issues like diversity, inform issues like renewal, inform issues about. So Michelle, would you like to come in on that one, and then we're going to open to questions.
Thank you. I think one thing I always keep in mind on our board, we can have a minimum of 7 people and up to 9. And I'm happy to have an empty chair, an empty board member chair, not the chairperson of the board. Because at our foundation, we've put some term limits, maximum 9 years. So it's 3 terms, renewable 3 times, so maximum 9 year. Imagine recruiting someone and it's just really not fit for purpose, to take Carol's term, and that person is there for 9 years. It's a very long time. It also pollutes a little bit the experience of the other board members who are volunteers. You have to remember they are volunteers. So I'm always cautious about who we will bring on board, and so are other board members. So is the board. So what we've done is we've drafted a table, an Excel table with every board member. We've listed criteria like who they are and certain competencies and skill sets. What do they bring? We've mapped it out. And then when we have a position that is open, we start searching for people that have these specific skill sets. Just like it was mentioned, we then, so we create a working group to validate the skills that we're missing. Then we start launching a search, and it's open to all board members, can propose names of people. I also do extensive research outside of our circle, because again, I want to refrain from approaching people we know. So I call donors, ask them if they might know someone. So these are donors that are very regular donors to our organization. If they might have some names of people that they might suggest for us. I'm explicit about the competencies that we're looking for. We draw up a long list. I create a bio on each of these potential candidates. We create a short list, and then we start interviewing them, and I interview them with board members. We come back to the board with our recommendation, and then the board makes a decision in terms of who the candidate will be. So we literally have a job description. We are clear about the time commitment. So 4 board meetings per year, 2 hours each, plus 1 board dinner. We are also clear about outside work. So whether it's part of working groups to address specific topics. Since I have a strategic plan, I'm clear about what those topics will be for the next couple of years. So on and so forth. So I'm very clear about their time commitment, their engagement, the donor relation work that they need to do. So they don't need to be fundraisers, but they need to accompany me on donor development. So we're not looking at just creating transactions, just raising money. We're building relationships, and everybody is good at that. So I also, during this interviewing process with them, try to identify their strengths. Everybody on the board has different strengths. And then when it comes time to put those into motion, then I go and pick those specific board members to accompany me on different work that needs to be done. I don't know if that answers all the, oh, sorry, I forgot one important part. So once we've selected the candidates, I do an extensive onboarding before their first board meeting. That means that the board member that we've just recruited will be ready to start interacting immediately, not a year later until they figure out what their role is. So I do board onboarding. I also introduce them to other board members prior to, so that they feel comfortable. So they meet the president, they may meet the treasurer, and so on. And then I ask them for their feedback after the onboarding so I can improve it. And then we also, but this is harder, conduct an annual review. And this is something Carol mentioned. But this is a little bit tricky because I've got people that think that don't think that we need to do this. So I'm working on that aspect.
Anybody else from the panel want to add to this around, the structures and the processes before I open it up to questions from the group? No? Okay, so I think it's time to open up. Kathleen?
Yeah, I'm just trying to go through because some of them obviously have sort of been addressed. I mean, talking about terms of reference, there were some questions around that. I'm just thinking, touching on Michelle's point, possibly there was a question in about how the staff can sort of help some board members who are less comfortable with fundraising, how the staff can working and volunteers can support board members more effectively in the fundraising side of things.
I'm happy to speak to that. If Atalante, would you like me to?
Yeah, sure. Anybody jump in?
Okay.
Not
a lot of people like fundraising, yet it is part of our board job description. But fundraising can be doing stewardship. So acknowledging donors' support can be equally important as opening doors. So again, I get to know my board members. I know one of them, for example, is happy to join me on donor visits. Another one is happy to introduce me. They have a huge network, and every single time I ask, I said, could you formally an introduction? I literally write the email for the board member, and then they copy paste it and send it. Next thing you know, I've got my appointment with the donor. I also have, so we have to figure out who they are, what are the strengths of our different individual board members, and sort out what we can expect from them, and use their talent appropriately. So again, fundraising, the ask, it literally really lasts 1 minute in the whole donor development. So don't hesitate to ask for advice and introductions and involve them in stewardship.
Great, thank you. I think there's a question, I think maybe for Etienne, about how do we, you kind of addressed it, how do we get young people to get involved? There was an interesting study at the university on governance, and one of the questions that was asked, would you be more likely to sit on a board if you were paid? And what was surprising, they thought that young people wouldn't want to be on boards because it took time and they wouldn't be paid, and that wasn't the case at all. I think that the young people recognize the value of sitting on a board. Etienne, do you want to talk a little bit to that?
Not that young anymore, so I'm 52, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer if the question is more personal. As I said, I think what is at the end interesting is how can you influence decisions of foundations and be part of the solutions? And I think in some occasions it's joining a board, and in some occasions it's being part of an advisory committee. That's the impetus for the youth. But I think the boards also ought to reflect how can get the next generation perspective. So that's my answer is very generous. But when it's turned out to be practical, while I recognize Michelle's point to say you don't need to go only with your networks, and I praise that. On the other hand, one of the biggest quality of a board members is also the ability to take decisions with others. So in reality, and because when you're on board, you're in boards, it's a very different system from other foundations. You want to have some kind of level of relationship. So I'm all fine with the principles of looking on a broader networks. But I think this is, I also think some level of knowing others. So I think being part of advisory board of a foundations where you get to know and to be known, it does matter. I mean, building relationship, making your own way through. So I think you have to invest time, get trainings, be part of boards. And while probably some people are as good as Michelle to look to the broader networks, I think many still look within their own networks. And I don't think it's that bad as long as it encompasses a level of diversity. When you sit on boards, you want to take decisions with people that have the same culture of decision making, that they have a different diversity, we discuss it. But so as the youth, I think, make your way through, spend time, go in trainings. It's not a given also for someone who's good at 50 to enter boards. I mean, at every age, it's not so easy to get into boards. So, I think it's an hard work. Convinced you're the good person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any more questions from
I'm just thinking maybe there are a couple that were sort of coming in. I guess maybe suggestions, recommendations on how to find good board members, where to go look for them, and so forth.
So maybe because I mean, I reacted already on the chat, but there are now NGOs that recruit board members with an open call, and actually have quite good results from it. It certainly helps to have, through that process, a very honest conversation about the role, about the expectations, and you can really set it up, and then have also the strong orientation we all agree is important. But I think for me the main point is again to really articulate the needs. And if this is a board that is primarily a fundraising board, then that means it requires a particular set of people, and trying to jam in diversity for the sake of diversity may not be helpful, as long as you counterbalance it and you understand, again, accountability goes both ways. There should be a conversation also about the downward accountability, and having surveys of all your partners, there are multiple instruments, again, to check that, are we incorporating the views, the feedback, how is our work landing in the communities that we want to contribute to, and sort of create a team. It's I think one way to make board more attractive is also to not expect everything from the boards. Really articulate I've seen board members shiver because from having been a sort of normal board, suddenly they have to go out and fundraise and they have no idea. You don't want to set up people with tasks that they're not suited for. So continuing to have conversations about what does the organization require, who's the best position to do, how do we bring in the different voices? And it doesn't mean constantly adding people to the board. It is looking at multiple mechanisms to bring in those different functions and these different voices. And then maybe one thing also that I think is something that should be looked at more and more as a really important modality is participatory grant making. When there are some very interesting now models of also having communities themselves determine what are the priorities, what are the best ways to meet those priorities. And so then if you have participatory grant making mechanisms, then again, the role of the board may shift as a result. So I think my main message is let's look a little bit broader, out of the box. I really applaud Etienne's point and initiative about bringing in young voices, and I think there's a lot for them to gain and a lot for them to contribute. And again, look at it as a problem, and how do we make that attractive to them, but also that when they come into a board, that they are properly supported and oriented, and they're not set up to be a token voice or be completely excluded or sort of dismissed or not given the full board role. So
yeah,
that would be
it's a story of, we want women at the table at the peace talks and so on, but it's not just a bottom on a chair. It's actually a real voice, and to get that, one needs training, one needs onboarding, one needs, there's a whole thing that goes around it. That's so true. Sarah, I see you're back. So did you want to add anything did you hear of that discussion?
Yes, I did hear it. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can very well. Yeah.
Yes, the other thing that we've done in terms of we've got a fairly balanced board with 5 women to 4 men. So in terms of our gender mix, I think we're comfortable. What we are working on is getting younger trustees involved now as we go out and recruit for 2 more at least, which will take us up to our 9. They serve the same term as Michelle, so we've recently amended that. 3 terms of 3 years, maximum of 9 years. But we are also basically, we've posted our new trustee roles which we spent, I think, is the same amount of time as Michelle was describing, you know, very carefully boiling down to what we think we'll need. We've written up job profiles, and we're on charity recruitment websites over here, like in the UK rather, like Bond and other recruiting websites. So actually paid for advertising, open call type route. I think in the UK that the number is something like 850,000 people volunteer for around 950,000 trustee roles. So it's a big pool of people, I think, out here who are, or in the UK rather, who are already actively involved as trustees. But yeah, I think our biggest challenge is now making sure that we do pull in this younger, the next generation, right? I think that was an excellent point, and hopefully in our recruitment exercise, that will be one of our important filters. I also thought that the point that someone made about, and I'm sorry, the signal wasn't brilliant when it was being discussed, but perhaps having a governance expert looking for that expertise. And I also like the idea of approaching donors, which is something we have not thought about doing, for a sort of list of potential trustees. You know, we've got some very engaged, very long-term donors, like the people I'm out here with at the moment, Jersey Overseas Aid. And I never thought to ask them whether they had any candidates. I think that's an excellent idea, and it's one that I'll be looking at. I have to say, I have to go now. I've now arrived at my next meeting in Nairobi. It's been a delight to be on the panel. I really apologize for.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for joining us in spite of your challenges. It was really great to have your perspective, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we've had a couple of questions, one of them by Oliver Pekovic, and it's really related to the work that he does. He said, how young is too young? But I think what's interesting about Oliver's question is that he runs an organization which is providing sports to young people as a way of empowerment. So I think that's, again, reflects our, you know, what is our organization doing, and should there be a voice on the board for the beneficiaries, which is something we haven't discussed at all here. But somebody mentioned it the other day, and I'm really uncertain about it. So in terms of, and there was one other question which I think is very interesting, which is about how do boards relate to data data management?
How do they think about data strategy and how to bring data into impact measurement, from Elizabeth there.
But I don't know whether, and again, I'd like to throw that at the board, and if somebody wants to answer whether this is something that, yeah, Carol.
So maybe I'll speak to that, because I think that one of the functions of the board is to keep keep asking about the so what question, and the sort of impacts, and keep, I was going to say, keep the team honest, just sort of being aware that when you work on a particular issues or work with partners, you can get so invested that the board will bring that sort of one step removed perspective and challenge. Okay, why are we doing this, and what is your theory of change, that doing this or investing in this organization, what is that going to bring about, and how do you know that impact has indeed taken place? So I think that's an absolutely key function of the board, to challenge the team and ask for to show how their intervention is delivering the desired, the expected result, and asking, you know, what would success look like, and hold people accountable to that. Having said that, I think, again, data can become a bit of a easy shortcut, and I see board members often sort of mimicking also governmental donors in requiring sort of KPI and sort of lobbing the jargon, because that makes them feel that they're doing their job right, and that can be also quite damaging. And working specifically on peace building, you know, sort of looking at the causality of different intervention and attributing it to specific one single intervention in a very interdependent, complex environment that can be very difficult, and it's not necessarily also the best use of energy and resources. So it's finding the right balance, and I think again working in dialogue with the team on what would make sense, and to transpose it to another set of data, which is the financial data. I often also say to board members, it's so easy, for instance, for the financial director of an NGO to come at the board meeting and do a big presentation, and the board members don't really know how to respond. So they will just kind of throw in pretty random questions, trying to show that they're doing their job and they're being tough. And it's not necessarily the best questions. And so each board member should ask, what are the important questions I need to ask? If I'm the treasurer, I'm going to trust that, the auditing firm is doing a good job. I'm going to trust until I have evidence of the contrary that the financial manager is doing a good job. But what are maybe the 3 indicators that I would like to monitor? And that is what is required for me to fulfill my fiduciary duty. And so that you stay in charge of the conversation by saying, I want to have a report back on these indicators because I think these ones are important, and you can do the same with impact data. Discuss with the team and say, okay, I think these are the important questions. These are the important data. Understanding the constraints of the work, of the context, and come up with measurements that make sense, that will tell the true story of the work, rather than again impose some kind of jargon or indicators that they think is relevant and useful. So again, it's a conversation, and being sure that you are actually delivering the value that is expected of you as a board member.
And I think it brings in very much what Etienne said. It's as important to know what we're not responsible for and we shouldn't be doing as it is to know what we are responsible and should be doing. And I think that's an important part of the conversation. So I think our time is coming to the end. I'd like to give our panelists one more chance. If there's one sort of blue sky idea that you would like to see to make the work that we do as board members as effective as possible, what would that be? Very shortly. So we'll start with Etienne. Okay.
I'm happy to start. I had something I wanted to broach anyway. I think when we prepare the conversations, the assumption was the challenge of teams working with boards and vice versa. I mean, that was when the assumption, the conversations, and we haven't touched upon that so regularly in the call today. But what I think is critical is the line of communication between the head of the team and the key representations body of the foundation that meet regularly with discipline and process. That can allow a lot of informality around that. I think you should find a good balance, and foundations, and when you discuss with authority, they would say that some of the major conflict within foundations are the dysfunctioning of the visions of the communication between those two entities. So I would say, be very disciplined to set regular meetings with key points of the conversations, and get responsible for that as the directors and the chairman or the chairman's office or whoever is organized. That would then allow entitles many other informal conversations, but be very serious about that part, because it is, while it's pro bono, while it's an ideal purpose, it is a job on both sides, and it has to be fulfilled with the disciplines. And you can put as much emotion of passion as what you do. It has to be well structured. It has to be transparent. I mean, it should be available for both the board members, potentially also for the team, because as Carol was often referring to, it's a mutual accountability. But you need to build process into that are smooth, natural, that raise the standards of what you do. So then you can dislike each other's. That's another issue. But very often setting very good process in place will help to set mutual expectations and clarify roles. And as you get along, you can, and I've been chairman of a foundations now for quite some time with our directors, and sometimes you rely on yourself, and that's healthy because things change and you can adjust, and it's a normal things of life. But if you have that within process, it's transparent, it's previsible, and that's helpful. So I just wanted to say, to make it fun, build, very good process in place that make it smooth the way it was discussed. Just reinforce that as a final comments.
Thank you.
So if I can comment, because yeah, I would use the same word, process, because and that means taking the time to think about the role, to think about the questions you want to ask, or the measurements, the criteria you're going to measure against. So have this meta conversation so that you can function well as a board. For instance, very simple, to have a set agenda for each board meeting, and say, once the March board meeting is about hearing from partners and having direct reports from the work, or meeting the staff and having a listening process with the staff. It's on the agenda, it cannot be disputed. And then we say, okay, well, but we also need to go deep into some of the just checking again, operations, processes are fit for purpose. We carve out a time and it's in the agenda. And so you don't have too much of this sort of personalized negotiation and power games. And once the process in place, it's no longer an issue for negotiation, and you can actually you can feel confident that all the different functions are being covered appropriately. Everybody can relax, and yes, make it fun. So people,
that's a good one.
Bring in the joy, bring in the passion, bring in the joy. If people are not enjoying their role, they're not going to stick around. And actually, one last point maybe, I have had some unfortunate experiences of coming out of board meetings feeling completely deflated as a staff, that my work and efforts were not being seen, that by trying to be helpful, they were throwing 1,000 suggestions that were actually not relevant. So you want to be holding the team accountable, but you also want to be, they need to be often re-inspired. Often NGOs work very hard, and just so look at also how you are playing that important function.
Thank you. Yeah, really important. Michelle, one last thing.
Well, I'm always very clear about my needs and my expectations. I'm also extremely respectful of my board members' time. They are volunteers. And so if I have a question, I'm very selective about who I might contact. It's not that the others will not get the information, but again, I'm just very strategic in how I involve them. So I'm very respectful of their time. Just like Carol and Etienne said, I'm also very organized. And that allows them to be very effective in their role. I'm also very observant of their strength, even though I may have discussed them during their recruitment process. New strengths come up that weren't discussed. And so I'm deliberate about how I involve them and make suggestions if I need to recruit them on specific working groups or different strategies. So those are my so I also interact with them between meetings. So this is where we can have maybe a little bit more lengthy conversations about topics where a decision will be made as a group, because we have good conversation. We have a culture of conversation, as Etienne mentioned, and we have this wonderful ability to make group decisions very effectively. So,
Okay, so much was said, so much useful stuff was said. But I think one of the things that has come out very clearly for me is we have to be very clear about the expectations that one has of the board members, and that clarity is connected also to setting up good processes in place. I think also with setting up good processes and clear expectations, it's also developing a culture of trust between the management and the board, and in fact between the board member and board members. And I totally agree that it should be fun. I remember there are some boards I go to, and I'm so happy to see the people that I work with on the board that we discuss. We're very professional, but there is that sense of we're in it together, that feeling of trust, and also in the same way, building that feeling of trust with the management team, so that Carol, you never have to go to a board meeting where you feel completely deflated, because that is so counter intuitive. It's so counter to productivity. So I really invite everybody to go back and look at the recording, because I think there is so many pearls of wisdom that have been shared by our really wonderful panel. Thank you so much, all of you, for giving us your very, very precious time, because I know you're all very busy individuals. I'd like to thank our audience for being with us at lunchtime in the middle of the week. We had a great group of people here, very engaged. And I take this opportunity to wish everybody a great summer, because I think this is our last panel discussion before we all head out or take a little bit of a break. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kathleen, with whom this could not happen. And we look forward to further conversations. And I just regret that Eliana, who was the instigator of this panel, and I hope I have lived up to her expectations, was not with us. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, wonderful panel. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.